Hey, Andrea. Hey, Tiffany. It's going good. I had a pretty good weekend. We got a little bit of work done on the vegetable garden towards getting it ready for the spring. Still a ways off from planting based on how cold it is, but we got some fresh soil added and some um, compost to loosen up the soil a little bit. Had a good day at church this morning and got a bunch of church stuff done this afternoon, and then I even managed to get in a little bit of a nap, and then I was hanging out in the shop till I came in to do this. So I learned a new word this morning, a new name for Teslas, and especially for Cybertrucks. Apparently, we are now calling them swastikars, which I think is just hilarious. So good evening, Piper. How are you? You're very welcome. I'm not sure how to be anybody else, so this is what you're stuck with. Yeah, I can imagine being a little anxious about that, Tiffany. I hope it all goes well. Um, Sometimes hard to get away from that feeling that the wheels are going to fall off when you try to do something new like that. Hello, Mischief. Yeah, sometimes all you can do is be confident that the plan you put together is the best it can be, and it's not going to be perfect. Something's going to not go right, so you just be open to that, but relax and go with it. And you know, um, respond to what happens instead of freaking out about what might happen. Um, at least that's what I try to tell myself. I'm not always. I can't promise that I'm always good at that, but that's what I try to do. Well, thank you, Piper. Um, that's kind of what I try to do. I don't. I've never had a lot of patience for people weaponizing faith. I would love that. Yeah, I think mindfulness practices are a big deal, a big help for a lot of people. Um, Hello, Joker Queen. Um, to the point that I think people have used that word mindfulness now to the point that there's been some real misunderstanding about what mindfulness is. Kind of like there's like the word mysticism. There's some real understanding about what mysticism is. In fact, my wife and I were doing some continuing ed together a couple of weeks ago, and the presenter, who really should have known better, equated mindfulness and mysticism, and they are not the same thing. But I think, for me, being intentionally present, where I am in my own body, paying attention to what I'm doing, and recognizing that, in this moment right now, here, I'm okay. And, that's good enough. And whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And when it does happen, I'll deal with it as it comes along. Yep. I had much the same experience, Mischief. And the other problem, the challenge that I have with a lot of what gets described as mindfulness, and I'm not saying that these things shouldn't be described as mindfulness, but a lot of what is described as mindfulness is probably works really well for folks who don't have ADHD, and not very well at all for those of us who do. I was telling Gretchen the other day that one of the sort of stereotypical mindfulness exercises is to just sit and sort of let your mind go blank, and when you have a thought that is like trying to distract you, imagine that thought as a leaf dropping onto a stream, and the stream just sort of carrying it away. And I'm sure that works great for a lot of people. For me, when I try to sit and meditate like that, the way my ADHD works is it's like that scene in, I think it's the second Harry Potter movie with the Whomping Willow, when it's in the fall and it's like covered with leaves, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, it like drops every one of its leaves instantly, like in a second and a half. That's what my stream looks like. So some of the sort of stereotypical mindfulness exercises just don't work great for me. And at a certain point, I got tired of, right, you focus on the fact that you're not doing it properly and get annoyed, or I'll either get annoyed with myself, or I'll get really frustrated because I feel like I'm being told by, whoever the coach is, that I'm not doing it right. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to do what you told me to do, and I'm not getting something here because it's not working. So I found it really, really frustrating. And again, that's not the fault of the people teaching it. Thank you, Tenor. I appreciate that very much. And I can't tell you how many people would be horrified by the suggestion that the world needs more me. But I appreciate the compliment and the spirit in which it is intended. I really do. Hey, Brinley. My mother, once when I was in middle school or high school. Exactly, Andrea. That's the thing. It's like, you tell me don't think about pink elephants, and all I can think about now is pink elephants. And I get that a lot of people are like that, but I'll like hyper focus on that pink elephant. But my mother once, when I was in middle school or high school, I don't remember which, but she just kind of looked over at me one day and said, "I can't believe I wanted you to be twins." And I'm like, "Thanks a lot, Mom." Yeah, I follow Dan on here on TikTok. I follow him on some of the other social media platforms. I think he's got some great stuff. He's clearly got really excellent scholarly chops, and I think he does a very good job of um, explaining biblical texts and debunking some of the myths and some of the really um, problematic interpretations that are out there. Yeah, I'm a big fan, and I highly recommend him for folks who want a better and more scholarly grounded understanding of uh, scripture. Well, thank you. Uh, I think compassion is a trait we probably don't spend near enough time focusing on, paying attention to, um, and certainly given that it is one of the most clearly documented attributes of Jesus in the Gospels. I think we would do well to pay more attention. Do I find that many Lutheran churches aren't affirming? I find there is a broad spectrum. So Lutherans have really struggled with our um, our witness to and our ministry with LGBTQ plus people. And this has been a live issue since I started seminary 25 years ago. This was, in fact, my very first year in seminary. So we had a fall semester, a spring semester, and in between in January, we had a J term. And every J term, you had to take one class. And my very first year of seminary, my J term class was Theology of Human Sexuality. Because we were already wrestling with these issues, and we've gone back and forth. And when my denomination decided in 2009 that we were going to allow for the blessing of same-sex unions and for LGBTQ people to serve as clergy and not demand that they remain forever celibate, um, a lot of people left. I have colleagues and classmates from seminary who were like siblings to me, like family to me, who um, not only left, but made it clear that they felt that I and everybody who stayed, we were all apostates um, for staying. And, you know, there were literally, like I said, literally, there was a guy that I went to seminary with who was as close to me as a brother, and I haven't talked to him in 16 years, 15 years, because at a certain point, I just got tired of, you know, day after day after day on social media, seeing him say that I and all of us who stayed in my denomination were apostates. So when we made that decision as a denomination, though, we tried to have our cake and eat it too. We tried to keep everybody happy. We tried to keep from having too many people leave. And so we adopted this this notion of bound conscience, which goes all the way back to, you know, Martin Luther 500 years ago saying, "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me." And basically, what the bound conscience provision said was that every congregation basically gets to decide for themselves, and every pastor gets to decide for him or herself. So, for instance, just because a congregation is a part of the ELCA, and just because the ELCA as a denomination believes that same-sex marriages are valid, does not mean that a congregation has to allow for a same-sex wedding to happen in their building just because they are a member of the ELCA. And by extension, I, as a pastor, am not required to preside at a same-sex marriage if I don't believe same-sex marriage is valid. So basically, we're trying to make it possible for congregations and clergy who were opposed to say, well, I'm opposed, but they're not going to make me participate in it, so I can stay. Unfortunately, that means that we wound up never having a very strong or forceful public witness on this issue, and we still don't. And it means that as time has gone on and as the world has evolved, congregations that thought they were going to avoid the issue have now been forced to deal with it, and not always in very good and healthy ways. I was serving a 4-congregation cooperative parish in 2015 when DOMA was repealed and same-sex marriage became legal across the country. One of the 4 congregations, that's where the NALC happened. A lot of the people who left in 2009 and congregations who left formed the North American Lutheran Church because they wanted to maintain, you know, women's ordination, which, you know, they couldn't go to the Missouri Synod and maintain women's ordination because the Missouri Synod doesn't ordain women. And it's interesting that they want to be biblically literalist about gay people, but not about women's ordination. And so they couldn't really go anywhere else. And then, really interestingly, all of the people who were mad and leaving the ELCA because we were, you know, apostates about gay people, they then started fighting with each other. And so then that movement even fractured and splintered. You know, for a while, Lutheran Core and NALC were all together, and then they decided they couldn't couldn't play ball with each other either. So anyway, the parish that I was serving in Minnesota, or in Lebanon County in 2015, one of the 4 congregations had a gay couple who were active members, and had been there for years, had been part of the congregation for years, and nobody had a problem with it. In fact, one of the men in this couple was serving on council at the time, and nobody said boo about that, right up until they said, hey, we'd like to get married, and we'd like to get married in our church. And then, oh boy, was there a fight. And I mean, it got ugly. People that I worshiped with and had visited in the hospital telling me that I was a servant of Satan. People, saying really horrible, all of the really horrible tropes that you can well imagine, and saying them inside the church. And eventually the congregation demanded the right to vote on the question, and they voted by a margin of 33-31 to allow this couple to get married at the church. And within 2 weeks, the 31 who had voted no pretty much all left. So because they had refused to talk about it, because they had buried their heads in the sand on the issue for 15 years, when it was finally forced on them, it split the congregation. At that time, we asked the other 3 congregations in the parish, do you want to talk about this issue now while it's in the abstract, or do you want to wait until a couple shows up and wants to get married here? 2 of the congregations opted for continuing to bury their heads in the sand and not talk about it. And one of the congregations said, no, that would be a horrible thing to do. Let's talk about it now. So we talked about it. And this was a congregation whose previous pastor had led them to write into their constitution that marriage was between one man and one woman. So we had a conversation about it, and everybody had a chance to share how they felt. It was a good, open, loving, kind, nobody got mad, nobody yelled at each other, nobody spewed any hatred at each other, nothing. It was just a lot of people saying, this is how I feel about it, or asking honest questions. And at the end of that conversation, the clear consensus in the room was that that congregation did not want a same-sex marriage to happen in their building. And those of us who were on the pastoral staff said, okay, that's very clear. We understand, and we will respect the bound conscience of this congregation, because that's what our denomination says we're supposed to do. And we will also reserve the right to act on our own bound conscience in terms of, if a same-sex couple comes to me and says, will you marry us? I will reserve the right to participate in that wedding off the congregation's property, which to me, I think is a reasonable compromise. I am not going to violate a congregation's corporate will, so to speak, but I'm also not going to ignore my own freedom of conscience on this issue. And the congregation was fine with that. And we lost, that particular congregation lost one member over that whole process, and he left before we even talked about it. Like, just the very fact that we were even going to talk about it, he got mad and left. And afterwards, everybody who stayed looked around and said, Dave, what's wrong with you? Like, Bob and Andy and Crystal, we had a good conversation with them, with the pastoral staff, and they listened to where we we were coming from. We listened to where they were coming from. They were very respectful. Nobody's forcing us to do anything. Why did you just pack up and leave before we even talked about it? And then I came to my current parish, and it was not a subject that I intended to bring up when I had been here a year. It came up. I mentioned something to one of our committee chairs. So when I had been here just about a year, almost a year, the offer was made to us by our bishop's office that if we wanted to have a table at the local Pride Festival, the bishop's office would pay the registration fee for us. Yeah, I mean, I'm not shy. And if anybody had asked me, what I think or how I feel about the issue, I would have been happy to tell them. But I was not going to say, I didn't come in the door guns blazing at Redeemer saying, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about it right now, and you're going to do it my way. I didn't bring the issue up at all. Yes, at the time it was my current bishop, but it was really not anything to do with him. We are an RIC synod for all that's worth, which is not much. We were not at that point, or were we? Yeah, we were an RIC synod by that point. But anyway, so the chair of the synod's LGBTQ task force called me up and said, hey, if you guys want to have a table at Pride, the task force will pay the registration fee. And my response was, thank you very much. I really appreciate the offer. We are not remotely ready for that. We have not had a conversation about this issue at Redeemer. I don't know how the congregation feels about it. I haven't been here long enough to broach this topic with them. It's not time yet. But thank you very much. And she said, okay, no problem. I understand. I then, again, out of a desire to be fully transparent, shared with one of the co-chairs of our evangelism committee that this offer had been made. And I said, hey, I'm just telling you, this offer was made. I have declined it because we're not ready for this yet. I just want you to know that the offer was made, and I said no. And she said, okay, great. All I said about it. 4 days later, the council president is asking if he can make an appointment to come in and talk to me in my office about this idea of having a table at Pride. And I'm like, I mean, well, sure, you can come in and talk to me about that if you want, but I already said no. And he came in and proceeded to tell me that he and the elders of the church think this is not appropriate. And I said, okay, number one, I already said no, because we're not ready yet. Number two, we're Lutherans. We don't have elders. To which he responded that by elders, he meant, well, me and the people who've actually studied scripture know what it says. Oh. And, we talked for about an hour and a half, and I said, we got to have a conversation about this as a congregation. And he was adamant that no, we didn't. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but number one, you and this group of elders don't get to decide. Constitutionally, every confirmed member has one vote. And there's a dozen families in this congregation that have come to me and said, can we talk about this at some point? Because I need to know if my kid or my grandkid is safe here. I have a daughter, I have a grandchild who is gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender or whatever, and they don't know if they're welcome here. They don't know if this church is a safe place for them. I said, so, we're going to have to talk about this at some point, sooner or later. So, I hope that you'll work with me let's put together a conversation. Let's put together a process as a congregation whereby we can talk about these issues in a way that is open and transparent and safe and loving and caring, and gives everybody an opportunity to be heard, gives everybody an opportunity to express how they feel. And then we'll see if we can't come to some consensus as a congregation about where we stand on this. I spent the next couple of months trying to put together that kind of process with the council. The gentleman who had come in to chew my ear off had just gone off of council. And I then learned that he spent the next couple of months lining up the opposition, holding secret Bible studies about why gay marriage is a tool of Satan, and calling up members of the congregation to try to enlist them to oppose Bob on this. And I'm like, look, what are you opposing me on? I already said this isn't my decision to make. All I'm insisting is that we talk about it. Well, he then got very mad. Things turned into a power contest. The council said, sorry, but he's right. We got to talk about this. He and a bunch of other people left. If you got to hide it, it's probably not a good thing. So he and a bunch of other people left. The congregation appointed another leader in the congregation to lead a process of conversation. And one of the things that I was the happiest about with that process of conversation was that I was completely out of it. I was not on the committee or the task force that led that effort. I didn't go to their meetings. They weren't accountable to me. The only input that I had was when they had questions, they could call on me as a resource. And at one point they asked me if I would do a Bible study on some of the texts that are typically weaponized against LGBTQ people. So I did, and I talked about how those texts have traditionally been understood and how we've come to understand them in a little bit different way with modern biblical scholarship tools. And that was it. I stayed out of it. And I'm pretty confident that nobody can really say, oh, well, Pastor Bob, just drove this and made this, and this was what he wanted all the way along. So excuse me. In the end, after this process that took over a year, the congregation voted by 82% to become what we call a reconciling in Christ congregation. In other words, an open and affirming congregation. And to do that, we had to commit to being open to, calling an LGBTQ person as pastor, if and when we need to call a pastor. We had to be open to calling a person of color as our pastor because they believe in intersectionality. And given that, our denomination is still 98% white, maybe we need to make ourselves some commitments on racial justice too. We had to commit to um, being open to same-sex marriages being celebrated on our property, and we had to commit to um, making a contribution of record to the work of LGBTQ inclusion in the denomination. We made those commitments, and so far we're working on living into them. And it has not been easy or fun. We've lost a lot of members over it. And again, a lot of them are like the guy in my last parish who got mad and left before we even had the conversation. And a lot of the people who got mad and left, I never had a single cross word with them. Yes, my denomination leaves the determination up to each congregation. Happy birthday, Hens, and I'm sorry your husband's having emergency gallbladder surgery. I hope he's okay. Well, yeah, except it's painful to me to anytime somebody leaves. And I think it's really painful to most pastors when somebody leaves. It's even more painful to me when somebody leaves and has never even talked to me about what they were upset about. Because a number of the folks who left were upset about things that never actually happened. Like I heard through the grapevine that one of our folks left because I had said a certain thing. And when I was told that, like the other people who were at the table said, I was in that meeting. You never said that. I was like, I know I never said that. I had somebody leave because she's adamant that I said that our Saturday night service was a dinosaur and the people who attended our Saturday night service were dinosaurs, and that I had said this multiple times in public in council meetings. And I said, I'm pretty sure I didn't, because number one, I don't believe that, so I doubt I ever said it. And number two, even if I did believe it, I've been doing this a little while and I'm not stupid enough to say something like that in public. Like, that would just be dumb. So I'm pretty sure I never said that. Oh no, you said it and I heard you say it. Well, okay. And I had folks who I hadn't seen in a while, so I pick up the phone and I call them and I leave a message. And then one of them, the next time she actually did come to worship, looked me right in the eye and said, oh, we're just really busy with, life stuff going on and we'll be back soon. And then, she hasn't been back in worship since. And I hear through the grapevine that she's worshiping in another church. If you're mad enough to leave and you're mad enough at me to leave, then at least look me in the eye and tell me that. I mean, I had another person who I reached out to, and a week later, I get a text message back saying, oh yeah, everything's fine, just really busy helping my neighbor with stuff. I should be back soon. And then 4 days later, I hear that somebody ran into her at a neighboring parish and that she's church shopping. And the next time I heard anything from her at all was a transfer letter that she was transferring her membership. And we've had folks that 6 months after they left finally did send me an email and tell me why they left. And it was a complete misunderstanding. If they had come and talked to me or anybody else, we could have fixed it in about 30 seconds. So And I don't by any means suggest that I am perfect. I am not a perfect person. I'm not a perfect pastor. I make mistakes just like everybody else. Um, and I've certainly made mistakes at Redeemer just like I have everywhere else. Um, but I've never known anything to get better when we don't talk about it. Um, I've never known I've never known us to grow around anything that we aren't willing to talk about. Yeah, and the thing is, Mischief, a lot of autistic people struggle with that, but they've learned to do it. And there's so many quote unquote neuronormal people who have not learned that. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Golden. I'm glad. Um, and it just I call it combat mode versus conversation mode. And there's so many people who are ready to go instantly into combat mode anytime there's something that they're not happy about or that they don't understand or they heard something through the grapevine, instead of saying, hey, I heard such and such, can we talk about that? you know we had a conversation about our Saturday night worship service because there were like 10 people coming, and it was making it very hard for me to spend time with my teenagers because they live an hour away, and Saturday is the only day of the week that I get to spend with them. And if we were going to use that service to as like outreach for people who were not already part of the church, um, a Sunday evening made a lot more sense than a Saturday evening for that. And so I said to the people who come on Saturday nights, or who were coming on Saturday nights, I would like to ask if we can have a conversation about moving this service to a different night of the week, whether it's Sunday evening or some other evening. I absolutely want us to have an evening service because I know that not everybody can get up and get moving on Sunday morning. I'm just asking if we can move it to a different day of the week. And here are the reasons I'd like us to think about that. I'd like to ask you to think about it and pray about it for 2 weeks, and then in 2 weeks we'll have a conversation about it. We'll just talk about it, okay? 3 minutes after I said those words, I'm shaking hands at the door at the back of the church, and one of the people says to me, "Well, I think this is a terrible idea." I'm like, "Well, thank you for thinking about it and praying about it for 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, we come back. We get to the end of the service. Actually, before the service, I had somebody say, "Well, I had to be here tonight to hear about you taking our service away from us." And I'm like, "I'm not taking anything away from anybody. I just asked if we could talk about it." Good night, hard luck. Sleep well. So I said, "Okay, folks, what do I made this suggestion 2 weeks ago. What do you think?" And we went around the room, and I made sure that every single person in the room got a chance to share their opinion. And 90% of the opinions that were shared were, we absolutely don't want to move to a different day of the week. We absolutely want it to stay on Saturday. There were 20 people in the room. 2 of them said, "Hey, we don't care what night it is, we'll be here." The other 18 were very adamant that they wanted it to stay on Saturday night. And I said, "Okay, thank you very much. There is a clear consensus. We are not real open to this service moving, so it's not going to move. It's going to stay right here on Saturday night, just like it has been." And everybody, they all just kind of like, they looked at me like they were shocked. And I'm like, now, I'd like to ask that, you know, when I say, can we have a conversation about something? Could you trust me that I mean have a conversation about something? Um, could you trust that I'm not going to just shove this down your throats or make you do it this way? That I really do mean, can we talk about it? Um, but we seem to be losing that ability as a culture. That's true too. Yeah, I don't know. I've just never been. I've never been a my way or the highway kind of um, leader, whether in the church or in the military. Um, I don't think it's a very effective way to lead. Um, there's definitely a lot of authoritarian tendency in fundamentalist Christian culture. Um, ah, it is. It's protein pudding in a pie crust. I get these little mini pie shells at the grocery store, and uh, sugar-free, fat-free instant pudding, and high-protein milk and protein powder. And I make the I make the pudding. Oh, and I toast walnut or toast some almonds and stir in. So I make the pudding with the pudding or with the protein powder and the high protein milk. Stir in the chopped toasted almonds, put them into the pie crust, and stick them in the freezer. Um, and they tend to make good little protein snacks when I need one. Yeah, I find them to be. I actually enjoy them more than I enjoy ice cream at this point. Um, when I pull them out of the freezer, I have to wait about 10 or 15 minutes for them to be thawed enough to eat. But let's see. Hen said, "You've been in a church with a my way or the highway pastor. They were befuddled when asked their." I didn't. I didn't see the second half of your comment, Hens. Yeah, I think most people have to make some changes after gallbladder surgery, whether they want to or not. They just can't tolerate some of the stuff they used to eat. Um, I know for my mother, she had to change what she ate um, pretty significantly. Uh, and I think the other thing is we're just, as a society, we're just not very good at hanging in there with each other in the midst of disagreement. Um, and we've come to a place, and the message keeps getting reinforced that anybody who disagrees with you isn't just wrong, they're evil. And that's really a toxic place to be as a culture. And I think it's a big part of what's wrong with our politics these days, is that we're completely unable to see and listen to each other and learn from each other. And the thing is that then translates into making us more susceptible to the most extreme voices in our politics. You're absolutely right, Polar Bear. We often listen to respond instead of listen to understand. Yes, I think we have politicized religion in a lot of ways. I think it's important to remember that Jesus was not a Republican, nor was he a Democrat. And there's never been a political party whose platform was identical with the core values of the kingdom of God. And so I think it's important that we remember that about both of the parties in this country. And people will say to me, well, how come you spend all your time talking about Republicans then? Well, no, actually, I very rarely mention Republicans. I spend my time responding to the most egregious examples of people dehumanizing each other. Right now, it just so happens that those are mostly coming from the right. But I mean, I'm not shy about calling them out when I see them coming from the left either. Yeah, white gun toting Jesus is also a blasphemy. Oh yeah, yeah. I've certainly run into that. Um, I have had occasions where I was literally quoting Jesus, and had a member of my parish get really mad, and you're just spouting liberal politics from the pulpit. I'm like, no, that was Jesus. Um, you know, I, and the other thing is, I'll preach a sermon that is not, I don't think, political, but is solidly grounded in whatever the assigned text for the day is. And someone will, tell me that I'm preaching politics instead of the gospel. Well, the gospel is political in the little p sense of political, because it's about how we live together in community. Good night, hens. It is not partisan, but it is political in terms of our the polis, the gathered community. Yeah, and I had one of our folks get mad and leave after the inauguration because I posted something on Facebook about the Episcopal bishop and her sermon, and that I appreciated her saying, be merciful. Like, be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful. That's Jesus. Blessed are the merciful. That's Jesus, straight out of the Beatitudes. I posted a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche about, and I only posted the quote from Friedrich Nietzsche because it was one that somebody shared that sort of resonated with me, which was, be careful when you're fighting monsters not to become the monster that you're fighting. And I reposted that, and this guy who I never had a crossword or a negative conversation with him, sees it and says, oh, interesting that you quote an atheist. And I said, well, I often quote atheists and Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and pagans and all kinds of other people. I don't have to agree with somebody about the existence of God to see wisdom in what they have to say. And in essence, what he was saying was, the same thing Jesus said when Jesus said, don't return evil for evil. And 3 days later, there's a message on the answering machine at church that, take him off of the mailing list because he's leaving to find a new church. Like, yeah. Hey, it's very troubling to me the degree to which we have come to a place where if people have to choose between their political ideology and the words of Jesus, they will choose their political ideology. Yeah. And I'm, at the same time, I keep saying, yeah, keeping the conversation open. I get people on the left mad at me when I say we don't get to write people on the right off. We don't get to ignore those people or pretend that they don't matter, they don't exist. Like, as I will frequently say in sermons, in the body of Christ, there is no us and them. There's just us. And that's true on both ends of the spectrum. I don't think it's any more acceptable to demonize or dehumanize people on the right than it is to demonize or dehumanize people on the left, because the problem is the dehumanization. And when you demonize and dehumanize, you start down a road to some really ugly places. Um, you're welcome. True. Um, oh, absolutely not. No, I am. I absolutely believe in setting boundaries. I believe in challenging problematic ideologies. I believe in challenging problematic policies. Absolutely. Um, what I don't believe in is saying, to hell with those people. I hope they all die. Oh, I'm having a good night, Polar Bear. I'm doing fine. But have a good night and enjoy your protein pudding. Sure, fire away, True. Yeah, and I think that's an appropriate boundary to set, Becky. And I will set boundaries like that with no problem. Um, it's when we start saying that, to hell with those people. I hope they all, with the current administration, how would I counter issues of disability? Um, I will admit going into this that ableism, I am not as I am not as proficient in advocacy around issues of ableism as I should be. Um, it is a growing edge for me. Um, but I think I would approach this in the same way that I would approach um, racism and sexism and misogyny and homophobia and transphobia, which is um, one, we all have to stand up for each other. Um, and yes, I've been hearing some of the rhetoric in this administration about disabled people, and it is chilling to me. So, one, I think we all have to stand up for each other, and we have to be paying attention to what is being said to and about our neighbors. Number two, I think we have to be willing to point out um, and using our voices to point out when these things are coming up, because I am uh, I know for a fact there are an awful lot of people who have no idea who Curtis Yarvin is. I'd never heard of him until a few months ago. Um, and there are an awful lot of people who um, don't know that people like him have positions of influence in this administration. And so when we hear elected officials praise people like that, we need to say, hey, wait a minute. That guy is like rancidly ableist and a eugenicist. Like, that's not cool. And we need to be doing that to educate like the vast majority of people. Okay. American life is so complex, and our politics are at once so complex and yet so dumbed down that so many people um, don't like, they have no idea what their candidate's position is on issues like disability issues. Um, so it's important that we pay attention, we listen to what's being said, we learn from people who are a lot closer to these issues than we are. I'm fortunate to have people in the disability advocacy community and disabled people who have educated me a lot and have shared a lot. And, this is a perfect platform for this. You can find people on this platform who will educate you on these issues. Amplify those people, like and share their content, repost it, make your own content highlighting these issues. Get on the other social media platforms and get this information out there. Talk to people that you know and about these issues. Sometimes it's just a matter of educating people about stereotypes that they've unknowingly absorbed. Okay. So, for instance, this is not specifically related to disability issues, but this is actually kind of a breakthrough moment that I had with somebody a couple of months ago on LGBTQ issues. Now, this was a person who was very clear that they disagreed with my position with respect to LGBTQ plus people. And we've always been respectful of each other. But very clearly disagreed with each other. And this person shared with me that part of their opposition to LGBTQ plus people was because someone that they love very much had been sexually abused as a child by someone of the same sex. Okay. Both the perpetrator and the abuse victim were male. Okay. And I had to explain that, okay, but that doesn't mean that the person who perpetrated the abuse was gay, right? In fact, over 80% of convicted or confessed sex offenders self-identify as heterosexual, regardless of the gender of their victims. The vast majority of predators, of child predators, are white heterosexual males. Right. And even if they're gay, that doesn't change anything. But in their mind, being gay equated with being one of the people who abused my loved one. And I literally pulled out my phone out of my pocket and did a quick Google search and pulled up the statistics from the U.S. Federal Sentencing Guideline Commission to show them, here's the statistics, okay, that the vast majority of men who victimize boys self-identify as heterosexual. Like, you're carrying all of this resentment towards the LGBTQ plus community for this thing. And in reality, like, it's all of the straight men you should be worried about. I mean, and obviously we can't live our lives worried about everybody. And frankly, we shouldn't be living our lives worried about all of the gay people. But like, that was a light bulb moment with that person where we were able to have, again, an open, honest conversation. They trusted me enough to share part of where their opposition came from. I was able to receive that and not respond with, well, that's stupid. Why would you think that? No, I just said, okay, I can understand why that would make you feel the way you feel. But you're operating on the basis of a stereotype here that is actually false. And I could then pull up the data and say, here's the truth. And like, they just reached out to me the other day and said, I'm still processing on that, and I'm still chewing on some of that. So, and the same thing with disability issues. Like, so many people who all of these different conditions that are what's the word I'm looking for? Being stereotyped, okay? Or that there's misinformation being spread about. That, I heard some clown on this app the other day claiming that the reason that the prevalence of ADHD has gone up so much is because of vaccines. Like, no, the reason that numbers for ADHD have gone up so much is because we've gotten better at diagnosing it, and we're not just buying into the kid who can't sit still stereotype anymore. Vaccines have nothing to do with autism, with ADHD, with any other form of neurodivergence. Like, that's been shown, I don't know how many times. There's no scientifically provable link between vaccines and neurodivergence. And we're never going to convince the hardcore nut jobs on that. Like, I don't, we're mentioning RFK Jr. Nobody's ever going to convince him. Okay. Nobody's ever going to convince RFK Jr. that everything he has built his life and his fame around is false. Okay. I wouldn't waste my breath trying to convince the RFK Juniors of the world. But I bet you have friends who listen to RFK Jr. on Fox News or being interviewed somewhere else or whatever, and they're like, or they read one of his books because somebody gives it to them as a gift, and they're like, I didn't know that. And you can be the person who says to them, well, the reason you didn't know that is because it's false. Because what he's saying there has been debunked. And by the way, here's the science behind it, and here's the evidence. And just because he put it in a book and got his picture on the front cover of it doesn't make it true, right? It's like we live in this meme culture where if you slap words over a picture and you put, a famous person's name under it, you can convince people that, that famous person said it. Like, to quote the great Abraham Lincoln, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Right. And that's, I think, a big part of how you turn back ignorance is with information. And you turn back ignorance with truth. And I encourage people, don't waste your time beating your head against the wall with the people who aren't capable of even hearing it. But absolutely with people of goodwill who you can talk to one-on-one, absolutely engage with them. And keep putting it out there on platforms like this, because, you might get a whole lot of haters in your comments. And you know what? You can block those people or just ignore them. But you might also get a few people who are like, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't know that. the the uh, the antidote to massive, continuous, compulsive lying from the current administration is to just keep telling the truth. I only block in cases where they are being abusive of other people. They can say whatever they want about me. Um, I've been yelled at before by professionals, and they're not going to hurt my one remaining feeling. That's fine. When they go after somebody else in my comments, they're done. So I am Gen X. I am 50. I turned 50 back in October, so solidly in the middle of Gen X. Well, folks, I think I am going to call it a night. Um, been a full day and going to be a full day tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight for a good conversation. True, it's good to see you. I've missed you, man. I hope you're doing well. Um, and thank you for the reminder that there's an awful lot of people at risk in this administration, and we need to be paying attention to that. So take care, everybody. I'm glad you're here. I treasure all of you. Be safe, be well, and remember that you are loved. Good night.
Nickname Hall of Fame according to the comment section. Orange Thulius, Ole Yam Tits, bowl of watery mashed sweet potatoes, sentient circus peanut, czar of the Lincoln Tunnel, dried out durian fruit leather, Opie McGropey, Bango Unchained, the Orange Atrocity, stained Tupperware, Emperor Palpatine Hands, Commander and Queef, the twice-baked Doug Dimmadome, Herbert Hoover, Boneless Wigman, Foil on the Butt of Humanity. That's a nice one. I like that ring. I like the ring that has to it. Pied Piper of the Transgender Mice, a General Grievance, Oralardo, King Ketchup Fingers, the Florida Man Project, Gropenfuhrer, Lord Dumpnut, which apparently is an anagram for Donald Trump. Very clever. Lord Fartquad, Ku Klux Klan, Bigly Smalls, and my personal favorite, Fart Butt. So they don't want us saying his name. You've run out of inspiration on what to call him. Well, lucky for you, I've created the Nickname Hall of